Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Ready, set, go, as I'm flying out of the gate, capturing all that's happened and what to possibly expect throughout the sports universe, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out all the veterans that have fought for our freedom and for our country. Thank you. As today is your day, not observed, November 11th, Veterans Day. I had to get that out right out of the gate. So for all the veterans or the few that are out there listening or even watching on YouTube, thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for all you've done to protect our freedom, country, etc. So now as we get right to it, an NFL season that is just right past the halfway point. I know that the Rams and Dolphins will play tonight, which both teams have played 8 games, but they'll conclude Week 10 with 9 games when it's all said and done. And the only way I could bring up not only just what happened there yesterday, but even Thursday night, the crazy game, but between the Bengals and Ravens, but how I look at this first half. And I'll talk more about what the second half may be on Thursday's podcast, but this first half is being broken down by the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, I understand we could encapsulate a lot of what has taken place, especially in the AFC, the Chiefs being perfect, 9-0, here they are, and they do it in a myriad of ways. This is not a Chief team that we could certainly look at and say they're just running up the points by the numbers. It's looking like a video game with Patrick Mahomes and company. It is far from the case. So for the Chiefs, whether they do it on defense, whether they do it on special teams with their kicker, whether Patrick Mahomes does it with his legs as well as his arm, and yes, even with the special teams, getting that blocked field goal at the end, which looked like the Broncos were going to get out of Arrowhead, not only with a victory, but to put a loss on the ledger of the Kansas City Chiefs. That was not the case. Their perfect season still goes on, and that's the good if you're a Chief fan that, as we all know, back-to-back championships, now looking for a third straight, which we have not seen here in the Super Bowl era. And even though people want to start puffing out their chest to think that could this team run the table, go 17-0, and then into a postseason, which they could deem themselves to be the best team ever in the history of the sport, as I've said before, and I'll say one last time, you have to pump the brakes on that. Get me to week 15, 16, 17, and maybe we could discuss it. Week 10, where they still have 8 more games to go, and understand the schedule, it's not unbearable. They do have a couple games late where they got to go to Houston. Right now, Houston's not looking too good. Or as a matter of fact, I believe they're hosting Houston, and then they go to Pittsburgh, which that looks like it could be pretty interesting. But there's no way that despite the fact that they do have a very soft schedule where they have to play the Raiders again, they'll go to Denver, which is not going to be easy in the Mile High. Chargers, they always take care of them where they're going to have to come to Arrowhead and sprinkle in a few other games that I mentioned, Houston, Pittsburgh, etc. Right now, we could talk about them being perfect and the last team standing as far as the champagne still on ice if you're part of the 72 Dolphins, and I get it, you don't have many that are left, considering most recently Mercury Morris, and we could go back, obviously, Don Shula, Nick Bonacani, Jim Kick, the whole 72 Dolphin team. But for right now, the Chiefs and what they've been able to do here in this first 9 games or first 10 weeks of the season, certainly not the blueprint of Chief teams of the past, but they find a way. Veteran team, I get it, Chief fatigue, sick and tired of them, but they have been part of the good of this first half of the year. Now, the AFC race has also been the same, if you ask me, because it's been very top-heavy, as we know. Chiefs headlining that. Buffalo, who beat Indianapolis yesterday, and now are 8-2. Now, they do have 2 losses in the conference, which is interesting because, let's just say, for argument's sake, if the Steelers, and whenever the Bills have their bye, but the Steelers are just a half game behind them at 7-2 and actually have a better conference record than the Bills. So although they have the 2 seed right about now, but the Steelers could actually overtake that depending on what happens here in the coming weeks. And we have an epic weekend. Speaking of a top-heavy AFC East, when we look at what the Bills have done at 8-2, obviously the Chiefs, as we talked about, Pittsburgh winning yesterday, which I'll talk a little bit about when I get to all the games there yesterday, and then the Ravens in that wild game there on Thursday night, they're 7-3 and right behind the Steelers, nipping at their heels. You have matchups this weekend where you have the 1 o'clock window, Baltimore at Pittsburgh, and the 4:25 game is Kansas City at Buffalo. So it is going to come to a head to see where these teams are going to lie a week from today in the AFC standings. And yes, you want to throw in Houston, you can if you'd like. To me, I don't know if they're going to be in the ranks of those 4 teams, and you have to throw Pittsburgh in there as of right now. But it's certainly shaping up to be stacked, loaded, and next week is going to be indicative of how this season could certainly shift when it comes to the power of the AFC. Then you also have the Lions. Last night, and I talked about the Lions last week, roaring, best team in the NFL, and I understand with the Chiefs being perfect, how could people outside of the Kansas City, Missouri area even think about the Lions being the best team? Well, last night showed it, where Jared Goff threw not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5 interceptions, and he did that in a little over 2 quarters. To think he had 4 in the first half, and he threw another one there, which was actually a punt there in the early part of the third quarter. But they were able to come back, and granted that the offense of the Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, stand-up guy, he even mentioned in the postgame that this was all on me, fault me, because they had a 23-7 lead at the half, and they came all the way back where the local kid, Jake Bates, or right outside of Houston, kicked a 52-yard game-winning field goal as time expired, just a hair inside of the upright, and the Lions leave out of H-Town with a victory, 8-1, continue to play very well after losing that second week to Tampa Bay. They've run the table to win 7 in a row, 8-1, 1 seed currently in the NFC, and that's been everything good of what's happened there. And yes, you want to sprinkle in Minnesota and what they've done, as well as a surprise. And obviously the Washington Commanders, you got to throw them in the mix as far as the good of the first half of the season. I'll talk about the game there with the Steelers in a little bit, notwithstanding that loss, but still you got to be excited about what they've been able to do under Dan Quinn, the head coach, and of course the sensational rookie Jaden Daniels at quarterback. So that's what you have there when it comes to the good of the NFL season. Now the bad, it's going to get bad. When you look at what we have throughout the landscape, let's count them. You have almost a dozen, to be exact, 11 teams in the NFL. Now, how many teams overall in the National Football League? As we all know, there's 32 teams. So you almost have a third of the teams in the sport where they're either 3 games under 500 or worse. And you have a lot of teams that are 4 games under 500. Shall I go through the list? And you have teams that are even 6 games under if you're Jacksonville, if you're the Giants, and that's bad in its own right. But you have a couple of teams that are 3-7, actually quite a few. Jets, New England, New Orleans, Carolina who won, and now all of a sudden they got a bit of a winning streak going on. What's happening down there in North Carolina? But you have that, you have the Browns, the Jets 3-7, the Vegas Raiders. All these teams are just putrid. And the sad part about that is that a lot of those teams that have been bad, they were expected to be good this year. Jacksonville was supposed to have a bounce back year. Aaron Rodgers, healthy and ready to go. A lot of people thought that they could at least be playoff bound and maybe even, dare I say, a Super Bowl. You can forget about that. Another team that is certainly underachieved. I get it that Tua was out with the concussion protocol, was out 4 games, but Miami came into this season as a team in the AFC to possibly make some noise. And you're not going to hear from them, despite the fact that if they win tonight, they'll be 3-6, and maybe if they somehow get themselves on a roll, could be part of the lower end of the AFC playoff bracket. So even Cleveland, for that matter, Cleveland made it to the playoffs last year with 4 different quarterbacks, and with Deshaun Watson coming in, you think, all right, well, maybe by chance they'll be anywhere between 10-7, 12-5, and they've been a dud. So a lot of these teams that actually thought going into the year we're going to have big seasons have bottomed out. So that's been another major disappointment and really bad when it comes to the NFL. And another bad that you have to throw in there has been the officiating. As evidence what we saw there Thursday night on that final drive in particular with the Bengals and Ravens, where the Bengals were down by 7, and on that final drive, not once but twice, Joe Burrow got hit in the head and it wasn't even called. And especially on that last play after scoring the touchdown there to make it 35-34, and as they went for it on the 2-point conversion, which they absolutely had to do, and people could argue, oh, kick the extra point there. Did you see that Bengal defense in the second half after Chase Brown fumbled the ball? And it seemed as if the Ravens at that point gave them all the gas in the tank that they needed because they just ran up and down the field against that Bengal defense. So better to go for the win than to tie the game there, and you leave 30 seconds on the clock with 2 timeouts and Lamar Jackson leading the charge down the field to set up a game-winning field goal for Justin Tucker. So with that said, on that 2-point conversion, what did you have? Not only did Burrow get hit in the face, and anytime you get grazed in the face, that's a personal foul, but then also the hold on the tight end there, which was obvious, and I don't know what the officiating was looking at, but as we've seen throughout the course of this year, even a couple of Thursday nights back, where Sam Darnold also got face mask, turned around in the end zone, and they didn't call that. And just those 2 plays in particular, and I could go through a bunch of other calls throughout the first half of this year where it just leaves you dumbfounded. So they certainly have to clean it up here in the second half of the season, because the last thing that Roger Goodell and company wants is, as we get deeper into November and obviously December, where now playoff positioning and teams trying to get seeds, and if they happen to fall by the wayside of poor officiating, that is going to be a bad optic for the league. So I'm sure Roger Goodell, after that game, sent the memo to all of the officials out there to be like, hey, you better get your act straight, because now we're going to really get into the teeth of the schedule. And even though you got a ton of bad teams and the races are looking pretty bad, which is also part of the bad too, because the AFC is top heavy. A lot of those bad teams are in the AFC. NFC, you may have a team that could be 8-9 making it into the postseason, even worse, 7-10, dare I even say. And playoff pictures we won't even begin to look at until we get to December, because again, we're just past the halfway point of the season. Here it is, November the 11th, and as we get into the 3rd weekend of the month, and we're not even halfway through the season. Or we're just past the halfway point. So we still have plenty of football to go, so we're not even going to think about wild cards. And yes, I may talk about it, the AFC and how top heavy it is and how these teams are going to maneuver and jockey for position, but it is still plenty of football to be played. But that's the bad. All those bad teams and a lot of the bad matchups that are going to be flexed out throughout the course of the second half, including the Cowboys, I might add, which they are just in a nightmare right now. But the ugly, as we conclude this before I get to some of the games yesterday, has been a rather forgetful first half. Not to say that every NFL game has to be a nail-biter, has to come down to the final seconds, that it has to just be topsy-turvy and memorable games and just games that you're going to look at, whether you're a team like the Commanders, which you have to say is probably the highlight of the season, the Hail Mary against the Bears there, where Noah Brown caught the ball in the end zone, the improbable catch where it pretty much looked at as the highlight of the, not only just the Commander season, but even the NFL season. Because I cannot come up with another game or even another moment that I could say, well, this is part of the 2024 NFL campaign as one we're going to remember here in this first half. I can't think of one. I mean, what are we going to talk about? The Bengal-Ravens game, both of them, how they both came down to the wire. In essence, the first one in Cincinnati was in overtime. And this one here, this past Thursday night, no, this isn't going to be part of the annals when it comes to this whole 17-game schedule. And one more time, that's not to say that every game has to be a barn burner. Everything has to be a scenario where, week 5, it was this game. Or, in week 8, it was that game. Or, just look at Sunday. You had this epic finale. I get it. That's like saying an NBA season or a baseball season has to be defined or characterized by a game or a series or something like that. No, but with the NFL, because it's weekly, because the games are just being played for the most part on Sundays. Obviously, you got Thursday, Monday, and now as we get deeper, you're going to have Wednesday games and Friday games. But for the NFL Sunday, it's not as if you could really sit there and think that, yes, That's a game that I'm going to remember here in this first half. Or, yes, we could talk about certain teams that have overachieved and have done well. Absolutely. But even let's say, for instance, with the Vikings, what's the one win that they've had that's going to stick out and be like, oh yeah, that was significant for the Vikings first half for them winning that game. Same for the Steelers. You want to talk about them maybe winning in Washington yesterday? All right, fine, considering they haven't really played anybody and they've had a soft schedule. All right, I'll give you that. Or even the Falcons. Yes, I know they had a barn burner against Tampa, but again, Tampa and Atlanta on a Thursday night, is anybody going to be running to watch highlights of that game, despite the fact that Kirk Cousins was great in victory? No. So that's what I'm talking about with the ugly on an NFL season where you don't really have signature moments, or at least a couple of moments that you could wrap your arms around and say, so far this NFL season has been wild, has been crazy, full of upsets, full of just crazy games, or moments that you could really say, oh, I cannot wait to see what the second half is going to entail. And as it is, as NFL fans, we're going to do that. We're going to wait to see what's going to take place and see how this is all going to shape up. So when we get to January, when the playoffs begin, then the second season will begin, and let's see the march for Super Bowl 59 down in New Orleans will then take place. But right now, these first 10 weeks, in my mind, if I were to grade this, at best, I give it a C-. That's at best. Could you give it anything more than that? I couldn't. And a lot of those have to go with those teams that were supposed to be good have been bad. And there isn't anything else that you could really grasp when it comes to the first half of the season to say, oh yeah, this team has really played well. Oh yeah, we expected the Jets to come back with Aaron Rodgers after the injury last year and have a big season. Or a young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence who made it to the postseason 2 years ago and they fell apart there late last year and then they bounced back. Not the case. Or even the Cowboys for that matter. 3 straight years of 12 wins, and I understand Dak Prescott out for the rest of this year. He's going to have season-ending surgery on his hamstring, but no Micah Parsons, no DeMarcus Lawrence, no presence of a running game, and you have a Cowboy team that's 3-6, and that's also going to be another, I don't want to say feather in the cap if you're looking for bad news or ugly news when it comes to the NFL this year, because that's what you're going to have here. So you're going to have no Aaron Rodgers, you're going to have no Dallas Cowboys, and who knows how the rest of the season is going to shape up. I was going to say at this point, you may not even have the Niners make the playoffs, but I'm sure they're going to make the playoffs. I know Arizona, you want to throw them a bit of a bone as they've been a good, but is anybody really expecting Arizona to be a team that's going to do some damage come January if they do qualify for the playoffs? So that's what you have there. And that's the only way I could really dissect these first 10 weeks, 9 games, and quote-unquote first half of the season. Now, as far as the games yesterday go, now I'm not going to go through every game. I'm not going to go through Carolina and the Giants, where Carolina wins, and you know that was a long flight back for the Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll, the quarterback and coach combo. They are, who knows what's going to happen there. If you're John Mara, the owner, you have to be sick to your stomach. You know you don't want to fire another coach after a couple of years. We saw this with Joe Judge, also with Pat Shurmur, also with Ben McAdoo. So what are they going to do? Now they're going to try to bring in another coach? Maybe. Would they even decide or even think to kick the tires on Bill Belichick, to bring him back home where his coaching career all started, especially in the NFL? That certainly remains to be seen, but I don't know if that's going to be the case, and they're certainly not going to fire Daboll here, even though they are at 2-8. But yesterday, the games of note, and that's where I'm going to go, people, because really, a lot of these other games, I talked about some as it was, whether it was Buffalo beating Indianapolis and the Bills, they continue to fire on all cylinders and obviously are looking ahead to that game against Kansas City there in their building Sunday at 4:25. But am I going to break down Patriots and Bears? Yes, we could talk about maybe Caleb Williams regressing a little bit. They were 4-2. Now they've lost 3 in a row. And this is a game that they actually, not to say they could have won, considering they lost 19-3. There wasn't anything close about the score. But you would have to think that if you're a Bear fan, that even with their slip-ups here as of late, but they would have been able to beat New England in their building to at least go 5-3 and to kind of keep themselves in the mix there as far as the NFC North goes, because it's not as if they played the Lions. I don't even think they played anybody other than, no, they played Green Bay this week. similar to the Steelers, I don't even think they have a division game that they played on the schedule just yet. So at least if they would have won, they could still control destiny in their own hands in a sense of playing the division. But right now, with them losing in 4 and 5, that's not a game I'm going to unpack by any stretch. Or even to get into another game such as Minnesota and Jacksonville. Now, granted, Sam Darnold was awful. The score was 12-7, more of a baseball score than a football score. But Jacksonville with those hideous uniforms. And same for the Houston Texans, that all red with the weird, I can't stand that. And Jacksonville had the white helmet with the black uniform. Can we just scrap those? Go back to the teal with the, that's more like it. And if you want to go all black, which I don't like either, but at least it's a little bit more representative of the team than it is to have an all red uniform or an all black with a white helmet. I just don't like that. But for that game, even with Darnold not playing well and their offense just sputtering, but Minnesota was able to survive and win that game. But is that one to write home about? Absolutely not. Am I going to talk about the Jets going to Arizona and just getting blasted in the desert, losing 31-6? Absolutely not. I can't even get into Dallas with Cooper Rush and him not doing anything on offense. And the Eagles just had their way with the Cowboys. 34-6. Cowboys 0-4 at home. Jerry, you know he's got to be pulling his hair out of his head. Is that a game that I'm certainly going to unpack? Absolutely not. The Chargers, a ho-hum 27-17 win at home against the Tennessee Titans, a Titan team that is already out to sea. Am I going to unpack that game? Absolutely not. Yes, I could talk about the rival there in the NFC South between Atlanta and New Orleans, and Atlanta losing in New Orleans. The Saints were due to have a win. They started off their season 2-0. They lost 7 in a row. Atlanta 6-4, and their lead is going to be safe in the division because of what happened with San Francisco and Tampa, which I'll get to. But for that game, Atlanta-New Orleans, which is a nothing game, despite the fact that Atlanta is probably going to win the division when it's all said and done. But New Orleans, is that a game that I'm going to really dissect? Absolutely not. Which is just indicative of this first half of the NFL. Seriously, I'm going to get into any of these games. As I mentioned, Giants, Carolina, New England, and Chicago. Going down the list, I talked a little bit about Denver, Kansas City. Good performance there by Denver defensively. And after that debacle in Baltimore the week before, at least they showed up in this game and actually had a chance to win before their field goal was blocked. But other than that, what more can I unravel in that game? Not much. All right, let's get to some of these games from yesterday, at least the good ones. San Francisco, Tampa. Now, for the Niners, they get Christian McCaffrey back. 13 rushes, 39 yards, nothing much to speak about. The big story was Jake Moody missing field goals left and right to the point where Deebo Samuel was getting into Moody and some of his teammates' face. I'm sure a lot of frustration there as the Niners did not want to lose. And if they would have lost, it would have been 2 games behind the Arizona Cardinals. And actually 2.5, because the Cardinals do have the tiebreaker against the Niners, beating them head-to-head earlier this year in San Francisco. But for Moody to get the field goal there as time expired, the one that really counted, 23-20, Baker Mayfield did nothing offensively. The Niners had their way. Brock Purdy had a big game. They had over 400 yards of offense. I believe off the top of my head, Tampa had, 189 yards worth of offense. So San Francisco dominated the game. But luckily for them, Moody was able to get himself right, especially with that final field goal to ice the game as the Niners win in Tampa. And I guess I should get to it because I've pretty much talked about all the other games. Cincinnati-Baltimore was a game Thursday night, as we discussed. More or less, it ended up on that final play. I know it's a bad loss by the Bengals, no matter how you slice it. And what a matchup between Joe Burrow, who had a great game, as well as Lamar. More so second half for him, but still. But for Pittsburgh and Washington, I guess that's the only other game I could really get into, right? Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. Yeah, let's talk about it. Steelers jump on the board 7-0, and then I don't know what in the hell was Mike Tomlin thinking of a fake punt, which was almost executed. Deep in his own territory on a 4th and 15, where Miles Killebrew, the special teams expert, threw a pass to James Pierre, who was right at the first down marker, and he dropped the ball. So I get it. They were that close from executing it, but a 4th and 15 where they're about to punt the ball in the shadow of their goal line, I couldn't understand that. But as it was, the Commanders scored a touchdown on that drive. And then the Commanders were able to get a lead back and forth, but then they actually opened up the game to where it was 24-14 and even 27-21. And at 24-14, the Steelers answered back with a touchdown, which was huge because I thought if they didn't answer there and if the Commanders would have scored there, chances are the complexion of the game would have been a lot different. But as it was, with the Steelers down by 6 and marching toward the end zone for the Commanders, on an 8-minute drive, Jaylen Warren fumbles the ball at the 1-yard line, and I thought that was it. I thought that was going to be the game. But as it was, the Steelers get the ball back, and Mike Williams, who they just got in the trade, on a 3rd and 9, it was definitely a low percentage play, but there was a blitz, and pretty much Russell Wilson just threw it up for grabs, but it was just a perfect throw where Williams caught it right in his breadbasket in the end zone. Extra point tacked on, 28-27. Steelers had to hang on a little bit. They got a big 4th down stop on a 4th and 9 where Daniels threw a pass to Zach Ertz. And even though he stretched out to see if he could get the 1st down, but he was already down. But there was a bit of a debate, and obviously it went to the booth to see whether or not that Ertz was able to get the ball, was at the Steeler 41-yard line, but they marked it at the 42. And as it was, the Steelers did have to at least run the ball, because the Commanders had all 3 of their timeouts, and then on a 3rd and 9, Cordarrelle Patterson got 8 yards, so it was 4th and 1, and then the Steelers lined up, and I thought to myself, I said, there's no way they're going to go for it here, because it was pretty much at midfield, and they certainly didn't want to turn the ball over on downs to where the Commanders have a short field, kick a field goal. But what happened? They drew him off sides. I believe the rookie from Illinois, Jonathan Hudson, I believe his name is, he got drawn off, and the Steelers were able to get the 1st down there and go on to win the game 28-27. And what could you say? Russell Wilson wasn't great in the game, but made plays when he had to. And for their defense, bend don't break. Jaden Daniels did not get into the end zone as far as any touchdown passes go. But the offense rallied down by 10. Good job, and actually fumbled an opportunity away to get into the end zone. So you got to give it up for what the Steelers offense was able to do. And right now, that Russell Wilson move, even after the start by Justin Fields at 4-2, is looking genius right now. Now, granted, he beat the Jets and Giants along the way, but a game in Washington against an upstart team, that was a big win. But now it really begins for the Steelers, because after 9 games, 7-2, which it could have been 8-1 if they would have won that Cowboy game on Sunday night, now they'll have the Ravens, and that is going to be a monster game, similar to Kansas City Buffalo. And I'll talk more about those games on Thursday, like I mentioned. But those are going to be from here on out. Think about it, people. And I've said this for weeks on end, but I'll say it one more time. 8 more games on the schedule for the Steelers. 6 of those 8 games in the division. And the other 2 games at Philly and Christmas Day home to the Chiefs. So it's all right in front of them. So let's see what's going to happen there as we look forward to a Week 11 there in the National Football League. And and I might add, Thursday night to start off your Week 11 with Kansas City Buffalo as well as Baltimore Pittsburgh, Washington at Philadelphia. And that's what you have with the NFL. Nothing else to really unpack or to discuss there. You're good, bad, and the ugly as far as the first half of the season. Now as I keep my helmet and shoulder pads on to go through some college football, and boy, did you have a just crazy Saturday where you had upsets, big upsets, controversy, which to me wasn't controversial, but I guess for Utah, where the AD had to come out and had some disparaging comments for the officiating, as well as a team that is toast. And I guess we'll break it down this way. We'll break down the 2 big upsets, the team that's going to be out for sure, and that's LSU, and then the BYU game with Utah. I got to start off with Georgia. That was a performance that certainly was puzzling. I get it was on the road at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a very good team. As we all know, they're ranked 16th and certainly moved up, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for the Bulldogs, who right out of the gate got an interception from Jackson Dart, and then 3 plays later punched it into the end zone, 7-0, and you're thinking to yourself, oh boy, Ole Miss is going to be going upstream without a paddle. But from that moment on, the Georgia offense went to sleep. And Carson Beck, we've talked about this the previous week, the 3 interceptions in the first half against the Gators, and him having his moments, especially in that first half against Alabama, although the valiant comeback were falling short. And Beck is a guy that you cannot trust And this was prior to the game here Saturday against Ole Miss. But since that time, when you thought that the Bulldogs were going to have gas in their tank, 7-0, they jumped right on them right out of the gate. And not to say that they were going to go running away with the game, but for them to not do anything on offense. And Jackson Dart recuperates, was able to obviously muster up some offense, and pretty much blew the doors off of that Georgia defense to where the final was 28-10, and that was one that I didn't see coming. Could they have lost a close game similar to Alabama when they lost in Tuscaloosa? Absolutely. But 28-10, not in it at all, that was a shock to the college football system. So it leads you to question number one, whether or not with Georgia with 2 losses, would they qualify right now? Now, they've moved out of the top 10, but I'm sure with 3 more games at home, and the 3 games they have at home forthcoming, Tennessee, which is going to be their season. They lose to Tennessee, they're not going to make it, even with 3 losses, because that means they're going to lose to 3 ranked teams in Alabama, obviously Ole Miss, and Tennessee. Now, the game is in their building, like I mentioned. Final 3 games are in Athens. So they have Tennessee, followed by UMass. That should be a cupcake. And then Georgia Tech, which now I could segue to Miami. But before I even get to that, I think if Georgia runs the table, they're going to be in no matter what. If they lose to Tennessee, they're out. And I think even with 3 losses, some teams can get in. And even though they are Georgia, but they cannot lose to 3 top-ranked teams in their conference and expect to just go into the postseason. But now with Georgia Tech beating Miami the other day, on Saturday, and it wasn't all on the offense, as Cam Ward looks like he's going to be close to locking up that Heisman Trophy as we get to the second week of December. 25-39, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns. But here's the problem. With the Georgia Tech offense, it's not as if their quarterback did anything in a one, Aaron Philo, who was just 5 for 10, 67 yards and 1 touchdown pass. So you say to yourself, wait, JAYREELZ, how's this possible? If the quarterback only threw for 1 touchdown, 67 yards, how the hell did they win 28-23? Well, 271 yards of groundwork, rushing, is certainly going to be a big help. And it's not as if they dominated the time of possession, because it was 34, almost 35 minutes to 25. All right, 10 minutes in particular, but still. Miami had their chances. They blew a lot of 4th down conversions, and including the one that iced the game for the most part. No, I was on a 3rd down with the fumble there at 28-23 as Cam Ward was scrambling around trying to find an open receiver. But now Miami, with their first loss, and I get it's the ACC, which they probably will end up either winning the conference or getting into the college football playoff. But now it's even dubious from this regard. Miami is also another team that has fallen out of the top 10. Now, granted, they should be fine the rest of the way, but with a lot of these teams that are on the come up, whether your name is a Boise State, who's been obviously very good this year, or even Army, that's right, Army, who's ranked 16th. And of course, if they beat Navy, and Navy was a top 25 ranked team early this year, who knows how far that could go for them to maybe even sneak in as a 12 seed. And don't forget, another team that is lurking. And although they're starting to gain some steam nationally, similar to what we saw early last year, are Dion and the Colorado Buffaloes. They're 18th, and I'm sure they're going to make a charge to see whether or not they're going to be a part of this playoff mix. But for Miami, I think they'll be fine as well, and they can't have another hiccup, as we know. Now, Miami, their schedule, I believe, is also easy, too. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. So, with Miami, they're currently ranked 12th. So they can't afford any slip-ups. And their final games, Wake Forest and at Syracuse. I mean, those games should be in the bank. So I would think they'll be okay. But losing at Georgia Tech certainly is going to hurt them, or could possibly hurt them as far as making the college football playoff. And then you have LSU, who I thought would fight to the very end and know that they have another lease on life, despite the fact that LSU had some bad losses here over the last few weeks. And for the Tigers in their building, which they fared well against Alabama in the past. And even though they had those tough losses, Texas A&M and Alabama back-to-back, Texas A&M, and then early this year when they lost USC, and you thought to yourself, all right, fine, this is where they could get themselves in a position where they'll make it into the playoff, and Alabama could be on the way out, considering that this was a loser leaves town match. And what does LSU do? Absolute squat. Jalen Milroe, who did nothing with his arm in the game, did everything with his legs. 4 touchdown runs. I think he just ran another one in the end zone for a touchdown, as LSU had no shot. Were not in the game at all. A flat-out embarrassment in the Bayou, as LSU say bye-bye to their chances. I thought that they were going to win a close game. I thought it wasn't going to be a high-scoring game, but I thought it was going to be a situation where last team with the ball is going to win. Well, Garrett Nussmeier, who's regressed big time, and is a guy that has ability, but he throws a lot of interceptions. He's turnover prone, as evidenced by his performance there on Saturday night. But for Alabama, they're going to be in if you're going to beat LSU as well as Georgia. Now, despite the fact that Georgia, who knows, that may not look as good if they do lose to Tennessee here this forthcoming. I believe that's a bye. I don't believe they're playing this week. They could be playing the following week, that game against. No, I believe they're playing this week as the final 3 games of the season. So that's what we got there as far as the situation regarding Alabama and LSU. And now let's get to BYU, where Utah, they actually had a shot. It was a 4th down play deep in BYU territory to where the defensive back had a hold on the receiver's jersey, and therefore they called it. Now I get it. Is it ticky-tack? It is. Was it obvious? It was. And for them to throw the flag there, I'm sure you could debate it. I'm sure you could just try to say to yourself, all right, it was that deep in the zone. Even if they called the flag, you could still stop them. And obviously they didn't, because then BYU went down the field to kick a game-winning field goal and left out of Utah with a victory. And like I mentioned, the AD came out and just blasted the officiating. I believe the university got fined and upwards. I want to say it was $40,000. Let's just double check that. So 40 grand, which obviously is not good. And I understand that they're frustrated and angry and they're disappointed because of that outcome regarding the situation with the pass, or not the pass interference, with the defensive holding call. But you have to call it as you see it. That was one where it's tough to overturn, and it's tough to even look at when you're trying to have a game and a situation where you want to call it fair. And sometimes we could swallow whistles, and sometimes we could say that, they shouldn't have made that call. Oh, that was egregious, or that wasn't egregious. They shouldn't have done that. But as it was, they had to call that. I watched the replay. I'm sure you guys and gals did as well. So that's where we have the scenario regarding BYU. And they're still, of course, in the ranks. As I'm over here, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm over here trying to fend my little puppy away because he's being a little mischievous here. So with that being said, you have a scenario where, yes, $40,000, the AD was fined for criticizing the officiating. But when we look at the overall standings here, and obviously with the latest committee and their selection and what we're going to see here, but right now as we look at it, it's Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State. Now people could argue, wait a minute, what about Indiana, JAYREELZ? They beat Michigan, first time they've beaten them forever, it seems. And although they did have to hang on there to win late, but they did win 20-15, 10-win season, first time that's happened in school history, so congratulations to them. As we all know, Indiana, the Hoosiers, that's a basketball school and a basketball state, but Indiana now moves up to 5, and people could argue, wait a minute, they should be ahead of Penn State and be in the top 4, but then that means you're going to have 3 Big Ten teams in the top 4, and I'm sure that's not what they wanted there, considering you have already. As a matter of fact, you can't have 4 teams in the top 10. You can't knock Texas out. Texas has done what they have this year to earn them being in the top 10 or even the top 5 in this case. And when you think about that, granted, with the teams that have moved into the conference, whether it's Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, but in this case, Oregon, you actually have 4 of the top 5 teams in the country are in the Big Ten. But then you have, after that, Tennessee, BYU, who moved up a couple of spots with their win, and obviously with Georgia and Miami losing. Notre Dame, Alabama, and Ole Miss are your top 10. So now 11 and 12. And remember, the playoff is 12 teams. Georgia, Miami. One more slip up by Georgia, they're done. That's it. And Miami, they could be in danger if they slip up. I don't think they will. Georgia, to me, is more of a team that's prone to lose because of Tennessee on their schedule and maybe Georgia Tech, although the games are at home. Miami, I mean, seriously, if they lose to Syracuse, or to Wake next week in their building, then they don't deserve to go into the postseason. And then, like I mentioned, Boise, SMU is another team you got to look out for. Texas A&M, Army, Clemson sandwiched in between Colorado. So we'll see what the committee is going to put forth. We'll talk about that more on Thursday's podcast, but a crazy weekend in college football there, as you saw. And now let's see how this is going to play out here for the remainder of this college football season. All right, now let me put on the high tops. Lace those suckers up and talk about what we could discuss as far as the association is concerned. And I got news for you. For those who said, oh, wait a minute, that starts tomorrow? Oh, they're not doing this again, are they? Yes, they are. The NBA in-season tournament begins tomorrow to very little fanfare, especially when it comes to yours truly. I'm sure the diehard junkie hoops fan is probably looking forward to this, but let's face it. To me, it means absolutely zero, nothing. You think the Lakers last year, they celebrated that NBA Cup win when they beat Indiana in Vegas for this in-season tournament? You think that they are resting or are looking forward to defending their in-season championship tournament? I'd be shocked, and I'm sure Kobe would be turning over in his grave if that's the case, and even Jerry West for that matter. But yes, it does begin. I don't know if I'm going to be wrapped up in it. I wasn't wrapped up in it last year, and I don't know if that's going to be the same this year. I know you're going to have Klay Thompson as Dallas will play Golden State tomorrow by the Bay in Klay Thompson's first visit to the old stomping grounds, and I'm sure that's going to be a very emotional scene for Thompson, his former teammates, the crowd, etc. You're going to get video tributes, standing O's, and rightfully so, because Thompson, obviously, they didn't re-sign him, and he went to Dallas for that 3-year, $50 million deal. So all you could say at this point is thanks for the memories, thanks for the championships, etc. So that's going to highlight the start of this in-season tournament. But as far as it overall, I mean, your guess and your prognostication is not going to be as good as mine. It's going to be better because, again, I don't care. I'm sorry. It's not as if I'm going to be pumped up or geeked up for something that is, I hate to say it, people, it's meaningless. So let's just say, for argument's sake, the Lakers, if they even want to defend this title and they win it, what does that mean? Seriously, what does it mean? Or even the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are 11-0 at this point, and let's say they go on to win the in-season tournament. And I'm sure they'll be happy. I'm sure they'll be, all right, they're going to celebrate it, whatever. They'll probably have a banner pulled up at some point in the season, just like the Lakers did last year, which is an absolute joke, especially if you're a Laker organization. If you're a team that's never won a title, now Cleveland has won a title, as we know, but let's say if you're Sacramento, let's say if you're the Indiana Pacers, who were the runner-up last year, let's say if you're a team like that, who hasn't won anything in your NBA existence, you want to celebrate that? All right, it's, to me, not worth celebrating, but if you want to do that, all right, fine, great. But this is why it's silly, it's stupid, it's, I can't stand it. I haven't warmed up to it, I don't like it, and I'm going to have to follow it. I'm going to have to follow it to the extent to where, how this is all going to break down over the next month, where they have these semifinals there in Vegas for this in-season tournament. But besides that, people, I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know what else to say. I know for those who are out there that are looking forward to it, or for those who are going to dissect what's going to transpire over the next month, God bless you. Kudos to you. Fantastic. Maybe if this was a just solely NBA show, I would have to unpack this. I would have to say, all right, well, here's what we have here. Here's the breakdowns of the 6 different groups, 5 teams in each group, or however it is, 6 teams in each group, 5 groups. That just goes to show you how much I'm on top of this. Because, again, when it's all said and done, and let's just say for argument's sake, the Celtics win the whole thing. You think I'm going to be pumped up and ready to go? Be like, all right, they followed up their NBA championship with an in-season tournament championship. As I said before with the NFL, first half, good, bad, ugly, absolutely not. Let's move on. NBA, the Bucks. I don't know what's going on with this team. They are now 2-8. They are in trouble, if you ask me. It seems like the Damian Lillard experiment is not working or has not worked. And it just goes to show you, I won't go as far as saying chemistry, but when you have a guy like Drew Holiday, and I'm not trying to make him out to be Joe Dumars, but for Holiday to be traded, as we all know, for Damian Lillard, and then to be flipped from Portland to Boston, and the impact that Holiday has had on the Celtic team, obviously winning a title last year, and now off to a 9-2 start this year. Celtics winning yesterday in Milwaukee in an afternoon tilt, where the Bucks finally won a game against Utah on Thursday before losing, getting blown out by the Knicks on Friday, and then losing yesterday afternoon in their building to the defending world champs. That the only culprit that I could look at here when it comes to why the Bucks are not only 2-8, but they've absolutely been a dumpster fire since they fired their head coach or former head coach, Mike Budenholzer, is the front office. Because for them to do that, and I understand they were a 1 seed 2 years ago where the Bucks lost to the Heat, and I've said this a million times, and I understand it's been many months since I brought this up, but for Giannis, who missed the second half of game 1 of that series against the Heat, did not play in game 2, did not play in game 3, came back in game 4. And I understand they had a 13-point lead in the fourth quarter and some very just poor decision-making on the head coach toward the end of game 4 on Jimmy Butler, and then in game 5 when they lost in improbable fashion, where, again, the head coach made terrible decisions. But did that warrant him to get fired, considering that they didn't have Giannis for 2.5 games? I understand the front office could be unhappy. I understand it could be a little bit unsettled to say, wait a minute, we're a 1 seed, we lose to the Heat. What happened here? All right, well, let's bring them back for another year to see what could really happen, and let's take it from there. And as we saw, they bring in Adrian Griffin, fired halfway through the year. They bring Doc Rivers in, who, let's face it, I love Doc Rivers. They won a title in 2008 for my Celtics. Since then, he's done absolutely nothing. He's done squat. He's a guy that has a big reputation, a good guy, a great guy in the league, and came from TV at ABC, ESPN, to then patrol the sidelines for the Bucks. And what happened? They did nothing. Now, Giannis was hurt, as we know, going into the postseason, and then Lillard hurt himself halfway through that opening series against the Pacers, and we saw what happened. They imploded. But now they're 2-8, and they're healthy. And yes, I know Brook Lopez is falling apart there, not the same three-point threat that he was in the past. Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis, I mean, the guys, this team is a shell of what we've seen. Chris Middleton, he can't stay healthy. I know the Bucks have been bad, and we could point at the head coach, and we could point at this not working out between Dame and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But to me, this all stems from the front office firing Mike Budenholzer. And as it is right now, even with Kevin Durant hurt out for 2 weeks, but what has Mike Budenholzer done since he got hired by the team he beat in the 2021 NBA Finals back going on 4 years? What are the Phoenix Suns record as of right this very second? 8-2. So if you think that he became a bad coach, despite the fact of everything that I just chronicled, and yes, he had a bad series against Miami, but if that was the reason to let him go, I'm sure they regret and have choked on their kale salads, on their Sauvignon Blanc, and on their creme brulees ever since then, because the team has just been awful since that time. And even though Adrian Griffin, I believe they started off 30-11, and they fired him because they had some terrible games. Off the top of my head, I believe they played, they didn't lose to some bad teams along the way. I think they had 2 losses against, I don't want to say it was against the Bulls or the Wizards or whatever it was, but they fired Griffin halfway through the year. And the Bucks have just been, like I said, they have been disastrous. And I'm sure the Buck fan has to be sick because you have 2 top players on your team. If I have to think, Giannis is a top 5 player in the sport, and Lillard is a top 15 player in the sport. And even though Lillard, what is he, 34 years of age, so he's not going to get any better, and he's certainly not getting any younger, but this Buck team has just been putrid. And I don't know if they're going to be able to get out of this at any time soon. And who knows, could Doc Rivers be out? And they signed him to, I believe it was a 4-year deal. What were they thinking to sign him for? They should have signed him for 2 years. That's it. One and an option so he could cut bait. Now, if they cut bait, they're paying him probably $8 million a year. One more time. Just can't make up what's going on there in the Cream City. Couple of the other injuries. Tyrese Maxey out 2 weeks with a right hamstring injury. So who knows? With Embiid out and Paul George coming back and trying to find his way. Although the Sixers did beat the Hornets after a terrible West Coast trip, losing to the Lakers there on Friday night. Now they have a situation where the Sixers, let's see if they can get healthy and get themselves back on the beam here, even with Paul George and without two of their top 3 players. And that's what you have there with the NBA. Let me see, take a quick look. I know I talked about, John Morant week to week with a hip injury, and we know that the Grizzlies have played relatively well. They've won 3 in a row, 7-4 there in the Western Conference. Denver is righted the ship. Remember, I talked about some of their woes. They were 2-3, now won 5 in a row. They're 7-3. And last night, I believe Jokic against the Mavericks had a 37, 18, and 13 game. I mean, the guy is just unbelievable. MVPs 3 of the last 4 years. What more can you say? But NBA right now, yeah, about what you expect. I mean, Cleveland's been a shock there at 11-0. Celtics 9-2. And then you have a severe drop-off. And I guess if we look at these conferences real quick, the East, the top 2 teams, and then there is a significant drop because after the Celtics, the third team or the third seed in the East is at 500, and that's the Pacers. And then everybody else just levels off and falls off a cliff, where in the West, you have, just in the top 10 alone, all those teams are separated by 2 games. So you have Phoenix, Oklahoma City, and the Warriors at 8-2. And then the bottom rung, which is Lakers, Rockets, T-Wolves, Clippers, Sacramento, are 6-4. So all those teams are separated. And then you have the Mavericks 5-5 as they leveled off. And on the outside looking in, now it's way too early. We're 10 games into the season. So we're a little bit about an eighth into the season. Do I have my math correct on that? So I would say about that. 10 games, 82. Yeah, I would say about that. So there you go. That's your NBA pretty much in a nutshell. No surprises or disappointments to really speak of. And Mavericks are 5-5. Pelicans 3-7. And I know Zion's now hurt again. What a mess there for Zion. Even with all the weight loss and him trimming down, that still hasn't helped him. Yes, I know we could talk about the Bucks and the Sixers. They've been disappointments. But yeah, that's your NBA here early on. As I lace up my skates and take a trip around the ice, and I talked about them last week, and I have to bring it up again, the Winnipeg Jets. They are now off to an NHL record best to start a season, 14-1. And if you do the math, what does that mean? They're on a pace to go 77-5. Now, is that going to happen? Of course not. But Winnipeg, I will just say this to the Jet fans, to the city, and to the province of Manitoba, I think the last thing that you would want is to have either a record-setting regular season or to win a President's Trophy. Why, I ask? Or why do I say that? Just look at the last 2 years. The Boston Bruins, who had that phenomenal season, the most wins in a regular season in NHL history, and the most points in a regular season in NHL history, which eclipsed not only the Canadians of the 70s, who I believe were 67, 8-5? No, I think they were 68-5, whatever their record was. And they won a cup that year. And then the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2019, who beat the Canadiens that year of that regular season record-setting year. I believe it was in 76. But in 2019, Tampa did that. And what happened? They got swept by Columbus in the first round. And as we saw with the Bruins, they did Tampa and Montreal one better. And what happened? They had a 3-1 series lead over the Florida Panthers. And then they got knocked out in the first round, where the Panthers went all the way to the Cup final. So if you're the Winnipeg Jets, I think you want to tone it down just a little bit, because you don't want to win the President's Trophy, where last year the Rangers did that. So going back 2 years with what the Bruins did, and then last year what the Rangers did, winning the President's Trophy for most points in the regular season, and they didn't even make it to a Stanley Cup final, as they lost to the Panthers, and they were up 2-1 in their series against the Panthers in the Eastern Conference Final, and they didn't even win another game after Game 3. So just keep that in mind, Winnipeg Jet fans. And for the Alexander Ovechkin watch, 2 more goals there against the St. Louis Blues on Saturday night. 863 now, I believe, is where he's at. So now he's 32 away from surpassing Wayne Gretzky. The great one over the great Gretzky now is inching closer, trying to chip that away to get to 30, get to less than 30 and beyond. And yes, we are early in the season. The Capitals are playing very well. What are they, 10-4? I might add, 10-4 as of right now. And as we take a look at the standings, what we have here, pretty much the same. I know the Panthers have played well, as I talked about a few days ago. Devils, Hurricanes, Capitals. Now they've even overtaken the Rangers for that matter, as those teams are separated by 2 points, 3 points if you want to include the Rangers. Winnipeg, as I said, 28 points, 5 ahead of Minnesota Wild, who've played very well here to start off their season. And then you have a fight at the top of the Pacific between LA and the Golden Knights. But besides that, that's your NHL. Let me see what we got in the schedules for both NBA and NHL, as we'll talk about that real quick. And I know the NBA, I did talk about how Klay Thompson's going to return to the Bay Area. But NHL, anything noteworthy over the next few days? Nashville, Colorado, that's tomorrow. Tonight, what do you have? No, that's tonight, I should say. Winnipeg is playing, that's interesting. Winnipeg will play the Rangers here tomorrow night. So 2 teams that are certainly ready for long, deep springs, which we still have plenty of time to get to. I picked the Rangers to go to a cup, I might add, even though I picked them against the Stars. And Winnipeg did beat the Stars in their last game, as Dallas have been a little sluggish ever since those 2 games that they played against the Florida Panthers in that Finland series last week. But you have Islanders are in Edmonton, for what that's worth. Toronto at Washington, and you haven't seen Austin Matthews, as he's been out of the lineup. That's what you have there. NHL, so you have Winnipeg at the Rangers tomorrow night. So that's a game that you may want to tune into if you're a hockey fan. And in the NBA, what do you have here? Clippers at Oklahoma City. That's tonight. Tomorrow, Knicks and Philly. But again, no Embiid, no Maxey. So that takes a lot of juice. That's a first round rematch of last year's postseason. Dallas at Golden State, you guys and gals already know. And that's a TNT doubleheader. Knicks, Sixers, followed by Mavericks and Warriors. And then Wednesday, Boston at Brooklyn. They played on Friday night where the Celtics beat the Nets. Cleveland at Philadelphia. Again, that would have been great if you had Embiid. New Orleans to Oklahoma City. Yeah, nothing really to even peek at. Memphis at LA to play the Lakers. And that we talked about last week. How Josh said, I don't like them, and who knows if there's going to be any, I'm not going to say backlash, but there has been a little bit of a, I don't want to say a rivalry, but some friction there. So let's see if there's going to be any carryover from the game last week in Memphis, now that the Grizzlies will face the Lakers out in LA on Wednesday night, and we'll talk about all that come Thursday. Now, as I wrap up, I'll get into just a little bit of baseball, because the hot stove, not really percolating, cooled off a little bit, but I want to, we have a couple of one manager hired and another one extended, but the Juan Soto sweepstakes. To me, the question is, what other teams besides the Yankees, who of course he just finished playing in his only season there in pinstripes, and who knows if he'll be beyond, and the Mets, who are going to be certainly not just flirting, but will certainly romanticize the idea of bringing Soto from pinstripes to blue and orange across the Triborough Bridge from the Bronx to Flushing. My thing is, what other teams are stepping up here? I haven't heard of anything, rumors or anything that's been percolating, as far as maybe the Blue Jays, which have been rumored prior to the end of the World Series. Or maybe, well, the Dodgers, that's also been rumored, and I don't think they're going to touch Soto, considering what that price tag is going to be like. And he even said, I'm not looking for deferred money, where with the Dodgers signing Ohtani last year, we all know a ton of that has been deferred. That's not going to happen here. I'm sure even if they offer him $1 billion, that ain't going to be the case. But you got no Dodgers. Right now, Toronto, who knows what's going to happen there. The Cubs, will they throw their hat in the ring? What about the Giants, as they're desperate to look for a star that the fan base could rally around, and certainly could have a ballpark filled there right by the Bay, to have the Giants have something to root for other than the Matt Chapmans of the world. And as we all know, Blake Snell opted out of his contract, so he's going to go elsewhere. They need, in the worst way, a star that could be a face of the franchise moving forward. We know that they flirted with Aaron Judge in the past. They actually signed Carlos Correa, but we know that fell apart. And what other team in baseball besides those teams? Will the Red Sox maybe make a play? We know they didn't make a play. They traded Mookie Betts away and certainly are still feeling the effects from that, considering Alex Verdugo, who was part of that trade, and even Jeter Downs, remember him? Those guys, I don't think there's anybody left from that trade from Mookie Betts that they brought from LA, sending Mookie to Boston, or sending Mookie to LA and bringing back players from LA to Boston. They have nothing to show for it. Will the Red Sox even think, considering that since they won that World Series back in 2018 with Mookie Betts in that uniform, other than a 2021 playoff run where they lost in the ALCS, they've done nothing. I don't know what other teams. And we could talk back and forth, Mets, Yankees, and right now it's not the day, but my question is, what other teams are going to be in the mix? Are the Yankees and Mets just going to bid against one another until it's all said and done? Will there be another team that's going to rise from the ashes to make a play here? Clue me in, because I don't know of any teams. So that's what you have there with the Juan Soto sweepstakes, which I know is going to be quiet, and I know Steve Cohen made a trip out to LA with Scott Boras and to meet with Soto. What has come out from that? Nothing much. I mean, you have a bunch of rumors. John Heyman on Twitter saying, oh, it looks like there's going to be a deal forthcoming shortly. We don't know that. How do we know? I'm sure they're going to want to read the tea leaves of all those other teams and come back to the Yankees when it's all said and done. If the Mets are going to put forth a 12-year, $600 or $650 million deal, whatever the numbers are. So that's what I have there with the Juan Soto sweepstakes. Other than that, nothing else really going on as far as the free agency landscape with Major League Baseball. The Marlins hired Clayton McCullough. Who? What? First base coach of the LA Dodgers. You know they were going to go with a young guy, Skip Schumacher, who was the manager of the year last year or 2 years ago, the 2023 season, qualified for the playoffs. They got swept by the Phillies, and now he's out. He's actually an advisor, I believe, on the Texas Rangers staff. But McCullough, let's see what he does as manager. We all know the Marlins. Now, granted, they had a lot of guys, especially their pitching, on the shelf last year with Tommy John. Sandy Alcantara, Sixto Sanchez, the young Yuri Perez. I don't know if these guys are going to be ready come spring training. Maybe Alcantara and maybe Sixto Sanchez, or if not, they may come in May, June, middle of the season. Now, the team has very good pitching, but they traded a lot. Remember, they traded their bullpen last year, the Tanner Scotts of the world, even players such as Brian De La Cruz and Jazz Chisholm, and a lot of the guys that, at least Josh Bell, another guy that was gone. Who knows what this lineup is going to be, but they do have pitching, and let's see if any of them will come back and at least they'll have something to hang their hat on down there in Miami, because we all know that team is not going to do anything to bring any free agents or bring any type of hope to South Florida as far as the Marlins go. And then the Yankees, they picked up Aaron Boone's option, 2025. He had an option this year. They picked him up. He's going to be the manager this year, but no extension past that. So he's going into this season as a lame duck. So I'm sure they're happy with Aaron Boone. The relationship between he and the GM, Brian Cashman, I'm sure is great, as well as the owner, Hal Steinbrenner. But he's going to have to sing for his supper. I'm sure it's going to be World Series or bust, especially if they bring Soto back into the mix or whatever other reinforcements by trade. I don't know if they're going to go after the likes of Blake Snell, Corbin Burns, or any high-priced free agent, knowing that if they're going to have X amount of money allotted for Soto, that going to be enough to bring in another big-time pitcher? Because they're going to need that, because Rodon, I get it, $162 million. He's not a guy that you can really rely on in a big spot. Garrett Cole, we know he's going to be back in the mix. Who knows what this Yankee team's going to do, but that's your baseball here in the early part of free agency as we pretty much get set for the winter meetings, which won't be until next month. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of rumors bandied about between now and then. But with that being said, people, that's the end of another podcast, another episode just about the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review. Throw me a few stars, write a review on whichever platform you listen to, whether that be Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Please subscribe there. I would sincerely appreciate that if you go and implore that particular channel where I post daily shorts, vlogs, even lifestyle vlogs, anything that goes on with the sports world and what yours truly is on there. So subscribe there as I continue to try to pump content out on a day in, day out basis. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following. Not only on YouTube at JAYREELZ, but of course, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I always like to say, and that is a fact. Ever since I came out of the womb, this is what I love to do. Watch sports, analyze sports, talk about sports, and I am going nowhere, people. One more time, I say it as many times as I possibly can. This is independent podcasting at its finest. Yours truly. I'm a one-man operation. This is my full-time job. So whatever support that you could bestow upon me, take screenshots, send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies who are like sports, casual sports fans, diehard sports fans, the kooky sports fans. Tag me on it, social media. I'll be more than happy to broadcast that as well, because I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.